Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something absolutely fascinating: the eternal cycle of how human civilizations rise, how they inevitably fracture, and most importantly, how we navigate that moral decline without losing our minds or our souls. We're talking about the courage to retreat and how eventually justice always gets restored. If there's a definitive villain in our history, historian David Christian hits the nail on the head. He calls it entropy. It's this absolutely inescapable force of decay that just dissolves structures into randomness. It literally couldn't care less about human suffering. And it's wild, right? Because Islamic theology talks about this exact same thing. Just look at the ancient, wealthy Nabateans. Their ruined, abandoned cities are this chilling, physical reminder that no structure, no matter how powerful, is immune to the cycle of decay. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with entropy and fallen civilizations, then explore the metaphor of the river, break down the trap of partisanship, look at the courage of withdrawal, and wrap up with the ultimate restoration. All right, Section 1, Entropy and Fallen Civilizations, the Inevitable Decline. When we step back and look at the big history picture, building a complex society requires massive amounts of energy just to keep entropy at bay. Think about the great acceleration of human society. In a mere 500 years, we linked up the entire globe. 200 years ago, boom, the fossil fuel revolution. 50 years ago, we were literally walking on the moon. It's incredible. But here's the catch. This rapid progression has accelerated our vulnerabilities, too. We've built this incredibly intricate, fragile global machine. And because everything is so connected now, when that machine stutters, civilizations come face to face with the classic horsemen of collapse: famine, disease, and war. When the social hierarchies fail, nobody gets out unscathed. So is it just a hopeless downward spiral? Well, not exactly. Islamic theology counters this grim reality with Sunnat al-Mudafa'ah, this idea of an eternal, divine pushback. It basically means there's a constant, active struggle ensuring the earth doesn't just evolve into a complete, unlivable ruin. Moving on to Section 2, the metaphor of the river, reacting to corruption. So when a society does enter an era of decline, heavily corrupted by those forces we just talked about, how do people actually react? To break this down, medieval scholar Ibn Qayyim gives us a brilliant metaphor in his book Al-Iksir. Picture a roaring, highly toxic, corrupted river. Now, one group of people sees this toxicity and decides to jump in and try to block it at its source. They throw themselves into this endless, exhausting fight against the current, but honestly, they achieve absolutely nothing except their own total burnout. But then you have the wiser faction. They take a completely different approach. Instead of fighting that toxic river head-on, which is basically a suicide mission, they strategically withdraw. They divert some of that imperfect water toward barren land and use it to cultivate entirely new, healthy life. They're growing orchards and pastures. It's the ultimate strategic retreat. They're choosing the lesser of two harms, focusing their energy on preservation and creation, rather than fighting a totally losing battle. Which brings us to Section 3, the trap of partisanship, fractured consciousness. You have to wonder, why do so many of us get stuck fighting in that toxic river? Why do we fall for partial truths and get sucked into the endless, destructive arguments of a declining society? The medieval philosopher Ibn Taymiyyah explained this using the concept of the barzakh. Think of the barzakh as your brain's vital psychological firewall. It's a cognitive barrier that forces your mind to align with actual hard evidence rather than getting swept up in blind partisan tribalism. It's what stops you from just dissolving into the angry mob. It basically boils down to this: blind partisan loyalty shrinks you down into a micro-consciousness. You start discarding the truth just to stay loyal to your specific political or social tribe, effectively breaking that barzakh's firewall. To reach full consciousness, you have to dissociate. You have to physically and mentally step back from those corrupt factions, strictly follow the evidence, and elevate your human capacity way above the petty squabbles. Let's jump into Section 4, the courage of withdrawal, a historical application. Okay, so how does this philosophy actually look in the real world? For a historical masterclass in this kind of strategic withdrawal, we have to look at the Prophet Muhammad and the early Muslims in Mecca. They were facing this incredibly hostile, morally decaying Quraysh society, but they didn't just riot in the streets. They executed a very deliberate, three-step retreat to preserve their moral core. First, secret preaching to a sincere elite. Second, they established a safe house, an incubator for learning called Dar al-Aqam. And third, they physically sought an alternative homeland in Ethiopia. And the key here is that they weren't just running away and hiding, they were actively building something far better. While the Quraysh media was waging this massive campaign of mockery, the new community was quietly attracting the intellectually and psychologically free. They completely bypassed the toxic tribal lines at the time, bringing together Arabs, non-Arabs, slaves, and elites into a beautifully diverse coalition. By having the courage to withdraw, they rejected the inherited corruption of their era and successfully diverted that river to grow a completely new garden. And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the ultimate restoration, eschatology and justice. Having seen how these systems fall and how the righteous preserve themselves, we reach the grand finale of this vast historical cycle. Because eventually, human efforts to push back against entropy hit their absolute limit. That's when Islamic eschatology steps in with a definitive divine resolution, the promised return of Jesus to earth to establish a unified, perfectly just world.